Here we are in the 2010 offseason, heading into the 2010-2011 season. We're going to start off with some GM and coaching changes. Starting off with the GMs, we see George Kokinis is fired from Cleveland, and he is going to be replaced by former Seattle and former Green Bay head coach Mike Holmgren. So this was a real-life move that happened in the real NFL, and so looking forward to having Holmgren take charge of the Browns. Then we have Denver, who had a clearing of house where Ted Sundquist as GM is out, and John Elway is coming in as the executive. Now, this was a real move that happened about a year later. So this happened in 2011. I did it a year earlier. Then for Washington, they cleared house again, Dan Snyder. And so instead of keeping Joe Gibbs, who was their legendary coach, during this time, he was actually the head coach. I moved him as a GM. The Washington team has really struggling this past few years with Jack Del Rio. So Del Rio's out, and so is Gibbs. And they ended up promoting from within. So Vinny Serrato takes the new GM spot. Then Mike Tannenbaum out in New York, even though he did draft Alex Smith, number 1 overall a few years ago, and Smith became a league MVP. But Mike McCarthy struggled these past few seasons to come up with any sort of success. So they end up bringing in executive Howie Roseman from the Philadelphia Eagles to take on that GM spot. Then Ernie Accorsi was set to retire anyways, and he continues to do so. They do decide to fire Jim Fassel after a disappointing season again. And then we'll talk about Jim Fassel coming up. And so they replace Ernie Accorsi with Bill Parcells, who was a head coach for the New York Giants in the 1900s. I forget which decade, but he's coming back from being a coach to being an executive. So several former coaches there. So we have Holmgren and Parcells coming in as GMs. Now we'll move to the head coaches. So with the New York Jets, they get rid of Mike McCarthy, and they decide to bring in Todd Haley, the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, who were the number 1 team in the NFC last year, which was a surprise. What he did with Jason Campbell, with Matt Forte, Brandon Jacobs, Larry Fitzgerald, all good stuff. Also, Todd Haley, I believe, was a head coach before this date in real life. And so we want to make sure he got his head coaching opportunity. And I feel like the Jets are a very Todd Haley type position. Yeah, because he was head coach in 2009 with the Kansas City Chiefs. So now he's getting a coaching job a year later, and this time it's with the Jets. He brings with him Tom Cable, who was the O-lineman coach for the Atlanta Falcons. So Haley brings one of his own to start calling plays. Art Shell's out. And then unfortunately Mike Zimmerman's out. And they was replaced by, I think he's the linebackers coach for Chicago, Dom Capers. But Dom Capers is more iconic than in real life because he did win a Super Bowl for the Houston Texans. But now he is taking the defensive coordinator job to support Todd Haley in his first head coaching gig. And so you have that veteran leadership there on the defense. Then we have Cleveland, who got rid of Eric Mangini in his third year. He went 6-11, 7-10, 6-11. He's out. Mike Holmgren brings in Jim Tressel, the head coach of Ohio State, or the former head coach of Ohio State. Now, this was a real move that was debated. However, the first year of Holmgren's term, he stuck with Mangini because it was his second season. And Holmgren did not want to fire a head coach after 1 year. He wanted to give Mangini a chance. In my franchise, Mangini was already in his third season, has already proven that he was not capable of winning games. And so 1 year earlier leads to, instead of Pat Shurmur being the candidate, it's now Jim Tressel. Jim Tressel also gets rid of Jeff Davidson, the offensive coordinator, and they bring in Greg Olson, one of the position coaches for the Patriots. So this is a kind of a Belichick move of bringing someone from the Super Bowl winning team onto your offense. So Greg Olson, I believe he was quarterback's coach, gets a offensive coordinating job here in Cleveland. Then Luke Fickell. Now, Luke Fickell in my franchise was a linebackers coach for the Arizona Cardinals. However, Luke Fickell does have quite the experience with Ohio State. So we see him with Ohio State in 2002, 2003, some of those early years. So he knew Jim Tressel. Jim Tressel liked him. And so Jim Tressel brings Luke Fickell on to be the defensive coordinator in Cleveland. Then Mike Shanahan is finally out in Denver after a very long and historic career with them. He has won a Super Bowl in the 90s with Elway. But he is now out as the Broncos head coach, and Jim Fassel is now in. We see on the below in the screen, Jim Fassel is fired from New York. And so John Elway does a lateral move for Jim Fassel, who made 3 Super Bowls in his career, but he lost all 3 of them. So John Elway thinks that Jim Fassel might do better in Denver, giving him the opportunity to be the head coach again. And I thought, too, Jim Fassel didn't have much of a career after his New York Giants days, but I felt that when he was more iconic and more prolific in my franchise, and I figured he is the type of coach that would have a lateral move with his success of making back-to-back Super Bowls, having a top-tier team, and then just not having it work out for a Super Bowl. With him is joined by Joe Philbin, taking the offensive coordinator spot over Greg Roman. He comes from the San Francisco 49ers. He's a tight ends coach there in my franchise. Probably should have been a coordinator by now. I think in real life, he was a coordinator as of 2007 for Green Bay. So he really had a late start to his coordinating career, but he's going to be at that chance here in Denver. And then Larry Coyer out in the DC, and we have Dan Quinn from Tampa Bay getting his chance now to be the defensive coordinator. Now, Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator for Seattle when they won the Super Bowl and then became the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. So all I've done is I think he's moved up a little bit faster in my franchise because he was at this point was an assistant head coach and defensive line coach in Seattle at this point. Then he left for Florida, which is the university, and then went back to Seattle as the defensive coordinator. For mine, he's having no trip to Florida. He is going straight from being a D-line coach in Tampa to the coordinator position for Denver. Then, as you see, the Giants there have Fassel, and they got rid of him to bring in Jim Caldwell. And this was a year that I thought Caldwell could have maybe taken Dick LeBeau's job as the head coach of Kansas City. But the Chiefs turned things around, and in what was a on-the-line tough year for LeBeau, became an AFC Championship attempt, where they lost to the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. So Jim Caldwell does get a head coaching job about a year late, because I think he replaced Tony Dungy immediately, and I have Bill Cowher in Indianapolis, because Bill Cowher has never won a Super Bowl. He's trying with the Colts. And so, yeah, Caldwell came in at 2009. So Caldwell just a year late getting his head coaching start. He does bring with him running backs coach James Saxon from the Chiefs as his offensive coordinator. Pat Shurmur is moving somewhere else. Mike Pettin, so we have 2 former Browns coaches there. Future Browns coaches, I guess, technically. But Mike Pettin is out, and Rex Ryan, who is released from his job as the Washington, D.C., gets hired by the division rival in New York. And we'll see if Rex Ryan can build a contender here in New York with the defense. Then we have Jack Del Rio out with the Washington team, and Marty Morningway comes in as a head coaching candidate. He was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles. Marty Morningway was the Lions head coach, and he struggled immensely as a head coach, and I don't think he ever got another head coaching job other than maybe college. No, never again. So he was the Lions head coach from 2001 to 2002. And then he was at the Philadelphia Eagles until 2012 when Andy Reid was gone. He was with the Jets, then he was at the Ravens. But in this franchise, the Jets have been the winningest team in the 8 years I've played. And so I figured he deserves another shot at being the head coach. And so Washington decides to poach from their division rival. And Marty Morningway is the Washington head coach after Del Rio has had many failed seasons. Mike Mularkey out as offensive coordinator, and Mularkey never really getting a chance to be a starter or being a head coach, being the guy in my franchise, because Mularkey would have been a head coach of Buffalo back in 2004, and he never got that opportunity. And he was a head coach in Jacksonville for a game, I think, in 2012 with an interim coach. And he was head coach in Tennessee back in this 2016, 2017. But he's never got that chance, and the way he's been on teams, I don't think it's going to happen. But Morningway brings in Mike McCarthy, who did well as the offensive coordinator for the Saints before getting his Jets job. Mike McCarthy may get a chance in the future, but we will have to figure that out in the future. Now, Rex Ryan out as Washington, and Eric Mangini comes in for Washington from Cleveland. Now, Mike Singletary had 2 years with the Raiders, and both were disappointing. He was 8-9 the first year, which wasn't bad, but then he went 6-11, and they had one of the worst offenses in the league, and that was with Matt Ryan at quarterback. And right now, Ryan's career is in jeopardy because he's not playing to the standard he's supposed to be. While Flacco made the playoffs with the Panthers, Kevin O'Connell, who is the Titans quarterback, has made the playoffs 2 years in a row. He is 2 of 2 in the playoffs. So we have a major decision there for Oakland, and Al Davis is not happy with Singletary and fires him, and then brings in the offensive coordinator of the Super Bowl winning team, Bobby Petrino. So Bobby Petrino, as we all know, is going to be a horrible selection, but this is Oakland, and Oakland has to be Oakland. Because right now, I think Petrino would have been at Arkansas right now, but he was the offensive coordinator for the Patriots. And let's see, did he ever have a... I don't think he was the head coach of Atlanta in 2007. So he has never done anything substantial other than he's been a coordinator in this league, or he's been a position coach. So Petrino is now going to be the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. I think it's hilarious. He brings along Pat Shurmur with him, where Bobby Turner was a running backs coach for Denver. He ended up being the offensive coordinator here in Oakland, but that did not work out. And then Petrino brings in Jack Del Rio to Oakland to replace Steve Spagnuolo as the defensive coordinator for Oakland. Then we have the last head coaching changes, or team swaps here, or the entire staff being gone, is Ravens firing Jim Schwartz after 3 seasons that are mediocre. Ravens wanted a different path, so they decided to go with Al Saunders, the head coach, the offensive coordinator for Detroit, who has made Brody Coyle a 66 overall quarterback, a Pro Bowler, and back-to-back playoff contender. And so the Detroit Lions under Chris Palmer have been fantastic. They have yet to really do well in the playoffs, but when you look at a season like the Lions had, Al Saunders was a top coaching candidate and someone that would fit the Baltimore Ravens style. Mike Shepard out as OC, and Darrell Bevell, who would have had a coordinator job earlier. Bevell, I think, was with the Green Bay Packers. I'll double check that right now. No, he was Minnesota Vikings offensive coordinator. He was with the Packers as a quarterbacks coach in 03 to 05. Then he became the Vikings coordinator from 2006 to 2010. So he has been just a positions coach with the Rams. I think he was the quarterbacks guy. Now he gets his chance at an offensive coordinator job with Baltimore. Raheem Morris, who would have been a head coach, I think he replaced John Gruden in Tampa Bay. He's out. He's never really had much success. And Mike Pettin from the Giants gets the Baltimore DC job. Then Bill O'Brien gets promoted from New England within to be the new offensive coordinator for the Patriots. Dan Henning retires for the Carolina Panthers, and Mike Shula gets the job there for the Carolina Panthers to replace him as the offensive coordinator. Looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, they probably could have and should have fired Marvin Lewis, but since Marvin Lewis has a tendency to stick around longer than he should, I thought it would be humorous just to keep Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati for however long it takes. And it doesn't really matter. He's going to be there. And so Pepper Johnson, one of the position coaches in New England, gets the promotion to DC of the Cincinnati Bengals. Then the Texans, Larry Marmee, I could have said he was retired, but I just thought, okay, Texans just missed the playoffs 8-9. They had some struggles. They have the pieces to be a top defense, but they weren't really that solid. Some could blame the offense, but I'm just blaming the defense. And so we have Leslie Frazier from the San Francisco 49ers getting a coordinator job, probably later than he should have been. But here he is now finally getting that official start. Then we have offensive coordinator Gil Haskell retiring from the league. He was with the Saints. He was earlier with the Seattle Seahawks. Maybe he'll join Mike Holmgren in Cleveland as an executive. But Rob Chudzinski of the Browns, even though they got fired, the team was swapped off. Chudzinski gets his chance as another offensive coordinator. He was a coordinator somewhere else. I got to see maybe where he landed. I can probably figure that out real quick here. Rob Chud, let's see, where did he go? So yeah, he was the running backs coach for Cleveland this past year, and he used to be a tight ends coach for Cleveland. But he was the tight ends coach for Arizona for 3 years, the Cardinals. Okay, he was the Rams offensive coordinator for 1 year in 2008 and 2009 because he replaced Adam Gase, who should never have been an offensive coordinator this early, but that was a mistake of mine. So I fired Adam Gase, Rob Chudzinski came in, and then Mike Martz was fired, and Greg Williams ended up getting that position. So we have Chud getting another chance at being an offensive coordinator. Then you see offensive coordinator Terry Shea of the 49ers. 49ers made 2 Super Bowls, won 1, lost 1. Then they went 6-11 this year. And so Terry Shea, who was the Colts quarterbacks coach a while ago, ends up getting I think he would have 1 year. No, he had 2 years with the 49ers. One where they made the Super Bowl and lost, and then this 6-11 year. So Kirby Wilson, the running backs coach for Denver, gets a shot here. Former Denver, because Denver got a whole cleaning. But Kirby Wilson was a contender for a offensive coordinator job, and he got it. And then Rich Olson, I think he was the former Cardinals coach, now turned coordinator. Not the Cardinals. He was the Cardinals offensive coordinator with Dave McGinnis. He's bounced around. He was the offensive coordinator for the Vikings, who made the Super Bowl. He is now the head coach at Washington State. Larry Kirksey, one of the position coaches, I believe running backs or wide receivers, he now moved up to the offensive coordinator job for Minnesota. And then Tom Moore moves into a consultant role, been an offensive coordinator for a while. I think Tom Moore probably should have moved on sooner. Let's double check that for just history's sake. No, okay, so in 2010, so the year that I just played, he should have been, 2009, he was a senior offensive coordinator. Then 2010, he moved to the senior offensive assistant and offensive consultant. So I'm doing that same exact move with Tom Moore, moving him to a consultant role with Bill Cowher. And then Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator for Denver, just moves on to being the offensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. So if you happen to watch this video, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the update of our coaches. I'll be getting to some more off-season moves coming up. Also, we'll be showing over some of the retirements. But hope you enjoyed this video and hope you watch the next one.